Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast live stream on this Thursday, December 14th, almost halfway through December. Hard to believe a new year is almost here, and this year has gone out with a bang, I guess you could say, in all the wrong ways. 2023, since October, certainly there has been chaos in the world's most chaotic and volatile region, the Middle East. But is that chaos set to spill over right here where I'm sitting right now in the West, in particular, the United States and Europe? Will Hamas and or Hamas supporters strike right here in the West? That's the question we are posing today. We've got some very troubling events centered around Hamas activity in the United States and in Europe. Number one, specific threats to strike the U.S. and the U.K. by a top Hamas official. And number two, arrests in the Netherlands and Denmark of several Hamas operatives, a Hamas terror plot broken up in Western Europe. And I like to say here on the newscast, folks, that what happens in the Middle East does not stay in the Middle East. Events unfolding there right now will profoundly affect all of us, no matter where we live. And here is further proof of that. I'm going to break that down in a minute. And also some of the latest happenings with Hezbollah, the Houthis, and speaking of the U.S., a very important visit today to Israel by the U.S. National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan. Now, I've said that the United States, under this current administration, is attempting to force Israel to essentially fight Hamas with one hand tied behind its back. Today was further evidence of that. The comments that Jake Sullivan made has a lot of people that he made have a lot of people talking, and we will talk about it today here on the live stream. But let's start. Number one, we'll start with the U.S. and what's happening here where I'm sitting right now and those Hamas threats. But a quick reminder, if you have not subscribed, to subscribe to the channel right here on YouTube. Click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. We are fast approaching, hard to believe, folks, as this year closes out, 1 million subscribers. We're at around 851K right now. And that's exciting, not for our glory or edification. It's exciting that the message is getting out far and wide for such a time as this. We believe we are sharing a message that is vital and that will help to educate people on these prophetic Bible times that we are living in right now and why you should care and why it all matters to you. So if you have not subscribed, be sure to subscribe. And we'd love to have you here with us every single day. It's absolutely free, by the way, to be here with us as a subscriber, as Watchmen and Women on the Wall. Also, a quick programming note. Tomorrow, I'll be traveling. And hey, a reminder, I know I've been in different venues for the past month and a half. I'm in an office here. I'm in an office there. I may be in the studio one day. I've been moving around a bit. There's a backstory to it. All good. Don't worry. Very good. What's coming. But in 2024, we will eventually settle down into our brand new set for the channel. And you're going to like it very much, I believe. More details to come there. But bear with us for the rest of this year and early into 2024 as I move around a little bit with our daily venue here for the live stream. But hey, at the end of the day, you're not here for the bells and whistles. You are here for the content. You'll get more great content. That programming note I mentioned, tomorrow, December 15th, I will be traveling, but stay tuned right here to the channel. We have an exclusive interview with a man, an Israeli man, and his family who fought Hamas on October 7th. And to just give you what we call on TV, a bit of a teaser, folks, this Israeli man was armed, battling dozens of armed with guns, Hamas terrorists. He was armed only with a large rock. How's that for odds? And yet he survived miraculously. You will not want to miss this tomorrow. This incredible, inspiring account of survival against all odds on October 7th. Join us right here on the channel. We will be posting that tomorrow. You won't want to miss it. Okay, speaking of long odds, in previous years, a lot of people may have said, well, you know, Hamas will never strike on U.S. soil. They don't have the capability, number one. And number two, if they did, the U.S. obviously would respond with overwhelming force. We've talked, that was the previous line of thinking prior to October 7th. among many, not I, but among many. If you watch the newscast, you know we have a much different take. But October 7th, obviously, folks, a major game changer. Before we get into the latest Hamas threat, just a quick background on Hamas activity in the United States. So you know, it hasn't gone into the physical realm of actual physical terror attacks. But what we have had here in the United States is a Hamas support network, in particular, fundraising for the Hamas terror organization, these front groups that operate here in the United States. I think back to an organization based in Texas outside of Dallas called the Holy Land Foundation, which was eventually busted up by federal authorities. They were funneling money back to Hamas. So you've had a Hamas support network here in terms of ideological support, in terms of financial support over the years, no doubt. But we don't have evidence of tangible physical attacks carried out in the name of Hamas on U.S. soil, although there have been dozens of U.S. citizens killed by Hamas in terror attacks in Israel over the years. And let's not forget, there are still some 9 U.S. citizens in Hamas captivity right now in Gaza as a result of October 7th. U.S. citizens were also kidnapped on that day. Also, remember, when it comes to Hamas in the West, in the United States, in Europe, Hamas is a self-identified branch, or what they would call the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. Yes, Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood are one in the same. And if you watch this channel on a regular basis, if you have read my books, including a book called The Brotherhood that I wrote and released a few years ago, you know that the Muslim Brotherhood has a very staunch and robust support network right here in the United States. And I've interviewed Muslim Brotherhood leaders in the West, in particular in Europe, folks, in places like Germany and the UK. And if you're thinking that they are wild-eyed, camouflage-wearing, masked men carrying AK-47s or Kalashnikovs, you're wrong. And that's why the Muslim Brotherhood is so dangerous. The intellectual, ideological brain trust of the Brotherhood, you're more likely to find them in a suit, in a tie, well-spoken, eloquent, fluent English. That is what I found over the years when I interviewed those Muslim Brotherhood leaders. So that is how the Brotherhood Hamas have largely operated in the United States. The ideological, the financial, the intellectual framework and support for the violent Hamas movement in Gaza and the West Bank, which we call Judea and Samaria here on the Watchman. But okay, that's your background. That brings us up to today, and now outright specific threats of physical terror by Hamas against the United States and against Europe. Obviously, the U.S. and Europe, no strangers to homegrown style terror attacks and terror attacks directed from overseas, of course. Many times over the past 2 decades, I'm sad to say, that's unfolded on Western soil. But here's what I'm going to read this right off my phone verbatim. I don't want to misquote this Hamas leader. Here's what Sami Abu Zuhri, the head of the political department of Hamas abroad, he's not based in Gaza or the West Bank, he lives abroad, I'm not sure where, but he said this during a recent broadcast on Al-Aqsa TV. And this was reported by our good friends at MEMRI, M-E-R-I, the Middle East Media Research Institute, memritv.org. Be sure to check them out. They're great. But MEMRI got a transcript and the video of this top Hamas leader. Look, he's the head of all of Hamas's political operations outside of the Palestinian territories, Sami Abu Zuhri. Here is what he said. When Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, is justifying the killing of women and children, the sons of our nation, the Palestinians, should say to him, you are the enemy, just like Netanyahu, and you must pay the price, just like Netanyahu. He went on to say that it is our nation. There is no nation of Palestine. It doesn't exist. There is Gaza. There is the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria. There is no official entity or nation called Palestine, but I digress. He says our nation, and this is where the rubber hits the road, folks. Now it is, he threatens Blinken, Then he says, now it is our nation's turn, the Palestinians, to pressure the Americans to stop this war. Okay, you might say, a little pressure on the U.S., calls maybe for the U.S. to stop, public calls for the U.S. to enforce a ceasefire, maybe going to the UN and complaining, etc. He takes it a step further. He then says, we need violent acts against American and British interests everywhere, as well as the interest of all the countries that support the occupation, explicitly calling for violence against the US and the UK. There you have it. He goes on to say the US and the UK and any nation that supports Israel must pay a price for the blood of our women and children who are being killed in cold blood in the streets of Gaza. They must pay a price so that they know that Gaza is not alone, and that when they gave the order to kill, they should have been prepared to pay the necessary price. Folks, there you have it. A top Hamas leader is explicitly and openly and specifically calling for, quote, violent acts against the US and the UK. Now, is he calling for Hamas operatives to make their way here? Or perhaps there are already sleeper cells of Hamas jihadis here. Perhaps they came through, I don't know, that porous southern border here in the United States. God forbid, even the northern borders become increasingly porous. Or perhaps he's calling on Hamas supporters here, born and raised in the US, based here, but ideological supporters of Hamas, the homegrowns, the so-called lone wolves that we heard so much about at the height of ISIS during 2014, 15, 16. And I wrote a bunch about this. Actually, in addition to the book called The Brotherhood, I wrote a book called ISIS Exposed, and you can find all these on Amazon.com, in which I exposed ISIS activity here in the United States and in the United States and in Europe. So what's he calling for? Hamas operatives to be activated here who are already here? I'm talking Hamas operatives from the Palestinian territories who have embedded themselves here? Or is he talking about just the sympathizers, the people watching TikTok and social media and different videos of Hamas and what's happening right now, and they're inspired by Hamas? They're inspired to act in the name of Hamas and carry out so-called lone wolf acts of jihad, maybe just on their own with no international support. Or is he talking again about Hamas Central overseas? And remember, you've got Hamas leaders based in Qatar and Lebanon and Turkey, across the region. And again, that robust network in Europe and the US. Look, would these entities provide logistical support, material support, other kinds of support to violent jihadists acting in the name of Hamas here on Western soil? Folks, these are all very pertinent questions as the war continues to rage in the Middle East right now. And as here in the US, of course, the FBI, and say what you want about the FBI, I get it, but we have to report, this is news, the FBI has been reporting, Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, has been stating repeatedly, including in testimony before Congress in recent weeks, that the threat level has never been higher, essentially, here in the US in terms of violent Islamic jihadist attacks here on US soil. European officials are saying the same thing, especially with the Christmas holiday coming, especially with Hanukkah upon us right now, almost over, but Hanukkah's here, Christmas around the corner. It's a time of great symbolism for radical jihadists to strike at Jewish and Christian targets this time of the year, which brings us to that European plot I told you about. Now, in Denmark and the Netherlands. And again, if you're watching, perhaps, a lot of our viewers live here in the West, but we've got people from all over the world, from every continent, watching us right now. And for our Western viewers in particular, if you thought, again, it's over there, it doesn't affect me here, this is a wake-up call. Not only those comments by that Hamas leader regarding the United States, but here's what's going on right now in Western Europe. Danish police have nabbed suspects. This is from the Times of Israel. Again, just reading straight off my phone for you. The Danish police have nabbed suspects over alleged Hamas plot against Jewish and Israeli targets. Israel was involved in the breakup of this plot as well. The Shin Bet, the Mossad, certainly coordinating with European intelligence officials and law enforcement. And Israel says that terror suspects linked to Hamas plan to kill innocent civilians in Europe. Here's more specifics for you. Danish police arrested at least 4 suspected Hamas operatives who were planning to carry out a terror attack on Jewish or Israeli targets, according to Israeli authorities and Danish authorities as well, who said they're going to bulk up security at Jewish sites. We've seen this many times, folks, and I've broken this down for you over the months, that many times when the Iranian regime and Hamas and Hezbollah, Iran and its proxies, want to retaliate or act out against Israel, at times they won't do it inside Israel proper, actually many times. Prior to October 7th, of course, sadly, you would have said Israel was a very hard target. October 7th certainly made it seem like that's not the case, with Hamas literally invading southern Israel. But prior to that, you would think it's easier to make a dent and strike at Israeli interest perhaps overseas. A synagogue, a Jewish community center, an Israeli embassy, an Israeli consulate, an Israeli ship, an Israeli vessel at sea, the list goes on. That has been Iran's MO. Now we're talking about striking Israeli and Jewish interests yet again in Europe. And just to expand on this a bit more, and it's a sad state of affairs. I've been to many Israeli embassies around the world, folks, from Brussels to DC and beyond, and the security, London as well, and the security is just absolutely intense. Isn't it sad that the Jewish people around the world, essentially in the eyes of Iran and Islamic jihadists, they have bullseyes on their backs? Every Jew from Tel Aviv to Toronto to Texas, in the eyes of the Iranian regime and its proxies, is a target. It's a sad state of affairs, and that's why the Jewish people and Jewish entities, institutions, Israeli institutions around the world need this massively airtight security in 2023, soon to be 2024. But more info on these arrests in Europe, which again are very, very pertinent to what we're talking about. The arrests, I'm just, again, reading this off my phone, which were carried out in coordinated actions across Denmark and the Netherlands, quote, thwarted a terror attack plot that aimed to kill innocent civilians in Europe. That's according to the Prime Minister's office in Israel, the Mossad, Shin Bet, Israeli spy services working with their European counterparts. Now, Danish police announced the arrest of 4 Hamas suspects, 3 in Denmark and 1 in the Netherlands. Israel says there were 7 arrests. Not sure what the discrepancy is there. But in the Netherlands, reportedly a 57-year-old Dutch man was arrested in Rotterdam. And the Netherlands raised its terror alert level, as has all of Europe and the United States, as a result of the war with Hamas. The Danish prime minister said this is, quote, extremely serious. It shows the situation we are in here in Denmark, unfortunately. Wow. He said there's a high risk here in Denmark right now. Wow. So Europe, once again, it almost seemed like after ISIS was crushed in the Middle East, largely crushed, it almost seemed like there was a lull of sorts. We had just this constant drumbeat of domestic attacks in Europe over the years, right? In the wake of 9/11, the London bombings, the Madrid bombings, Charlie Hebdo massacre, France, Brussels, it goes on and on. And then ISIS was crushed. Former President Trump kept his word. He led the defeat of ISIS. ISIS was crushed as any sort of massive entity in the Middle East. Yes, there are certainly pockets still of ISIS, but that ISIS caliphate was smashed. And all of a sudden, once ISIS was smashed, it became less appealing. It was a galvanizing force for young jihadists across the West. And we saw thousands flock to Syria and Iraq from the US and Western Europe back between 2013 and 2016 in particular. Look, Hamas was riding a wave of success. Success breeds attraction. Once Hamas was crushed and that success dissipated, the allure was gone for many in the West. So you had a bit of a lull over the past few years, thankfully, in terms of homegrown attacks in the US and Europe and homegrown plots, at least that we know of. Now they have a new trigger, a new rallying cry: Palestine, Hamas. So it's not surprising that the threat level has raised. And every time Israel and Hamas have gone toe-to-toe over the past several years, you've had the threat level raise. And folks, look, we've documented this here in the newscast. You've seen, obviously, across the United States, across Europe, the depth, the reach, and the numbers when it comes to that Hamas support network. These rallies that have been taking place in London, New York City, Paris, and beyond are pro-Hamas, openly anti-Semitic rallies. I think the sheer numbers and the vitriol at these rallies has surprised many. It shouldn't have, but now you know. Now you know the extent of the enemy within, and that the barbarians are not just at the gates, they are inside the gates. So this is what we're dealing with right now here in the West as Christmas is upon us. Hanukkah is here. Intelligence and services, law enforcement across the West also on high alert as Israel does what it needs to do, as it continues on its march to finish the job and to crush Hamas decisively once and for all, so that it never rears its demonic head again to attack the nation of Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, said yesterday amid U.S. pressure that, yeah, there's pressure, but no matter the amount of international pressure, and I quote, nothing will stop us. Nothing will prevent us from crushing Hamas. Amen. Israel's leaders right now, folks, and pray for them. They need the wisdom of Solomon. They need to turn to the Lord your God for that wise counsel. And they need to have spines of steel. So continue to pray for them. Right now, as international pressure mounts, we talked yesterday about the prime ministers of Australia, New Zealand, and Canada issuing a joint statement calling for an immediate ceasefire, which would be absolutely disastrous, would leave Hamas to fight another day. Joe Biden saying that Israel, quote, is indiscriminately bombing civilians in Gaza. He knows that's not true. Today, John Kirby, White House spokesman, walked that back, thankfully, and he said, look, Israel has gone to lengths, the IDF, the Israeli military, to avoid civilian casualties that perhaps even the U.S. wouldn't do. They're essentially putting Israeli soldiers in harm's way in order to spare Palestinian civilians. That's what Israel does. That's the truth. That's the real story. I want to talk more about this pressure from the U.S. and a very important visit today by Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, and what he said in terms of the timetable. How long will this last, this engagement in Gaza? You know, I spoke to a friend in the Israeli reserves. He's serving right now. He's away from his family. He said, man, this is lasting pretty long. He said, I'd love to get back to my family. Amen. You know, I have so many buddies right now in Israel who, hey, these are guys, look, in their late 30s and early 40s who've been called up to defend the nation. They've got kids, families, lives, careers, and they put it all aside to defend their nation. And God bless them for doing it. But it's not easy. Mentally, it weighs on you. You have little ones at home. You're away from them for 2 months. And during the holidays, it's not easy. So continue to pray for them as well, folks. All the Israeli soldiers, in particular, well, all, not in particular, none, but let me just give a special shout out to the guys and gals in the reserves who've been called up, left their families, who are a little on the older side, I guess you would say. You know, it's tough. Morale, it can be tough. I don't want to say morale-wise. The nation's united in terms of crushing Hamas, but it can be tough to be away from your family. Bottom line, that's all that needs to be said. And I think anyone watching right now who has kids, grandkids, who's been away from them for an extended period ever, you get it. So pray for them. Pray for God to put wind in their sails. as they continue to bravely finish the mission of crushing Hamas. And again, pray for Israel's leaders. A tiny nation the size of the state of New Jersey is the center of much of the world's ire right now, but you shouldn't be surprised if you know the Bible. And yes, this is a news channel that comes at it from a biblical perspective, proudly and unapologetically. This is no time to mince words. And at the end of the day, folks, this is not just a battle against flesh and blood, but against spirits and principalities. This is a spiritual battle pitting good against evil. There's no gray areas here, and it's really black and white. Israel and the Western world are engaged in an existential struggle against demonic evil. Hamas is a demonic death cult. These are modern day Nazis, just wearing different uniforms. And you know, that effect, or the effect, I should say, of this Hamas terror and just carnage and evil is being felt among small businesses, all businesses. The economy in Israel right now, tourism has come to a screeching halt. Obviously, tourism in Israel is one of the driving forces of the economy there. Small businesses are struggling. It's the worst period for Israel since COVID. We're obviously here in the US as well. If you're an American like me, or if you're European, you know what that did. All those shutdowns and lockdowns to businesses. Well, Israel's at war right now, and many of their best and brightest have been called up to fight. And Israel right now could use your support, folks. Israel could use a few good friends. You can tell who your friends are when the rubber hits the road and the going gets tough. That's where Israel's at right now. And you know that I have a few select organizations that I like to work with here on the Watchman. Mayor Panim is one, of course. And we love our good friends at Artza, who are a great Israeli small business, incredible handcrafted products made in Israel, places like Nazareth, Bethlehem, Jerusalem, the Galilee, the Golan, the Negev, and beyond, the Dead Sea region. And these great Israeli artisans, artists, producers are putting together these awesome boxes. It's an Artza box that is delivered to your doorstep straight from the Holy Land. And it's chock full with all these awesome goods made in Israel. Talk about a great Christmas gift, right? For the Israel lover in your home. If you've never been to Israel, hey, it's a taste of the Holy Land, literally. If you've been, you can't get back. Obviously, it's tough to get to Israel right now. Here it is. It will refresh all the sights, the sounds, the smells, the tastes that you experienced when you were in Israel. Check it out, artzabox.com. Again, these are my good friends, folks. I don't talk about many organizations here in the newscast. You know that if you watch on a regular basis. I believe in Artza. I've been working with them over 3 years. It's a top-notch, high-quality product delivered straight to your doorstep. The discount code is Watchman18 to get 18% off your Artza box subscription. Artza, A-R-T-Z-A, artzabox.com. Artza.com. I believe it's artzabox.com. For your 18% discount. You see the info there on your screen, and our trusty producer Daniel is posting it here in the chat. Check them out and use that discount code Watchman18 for an 18% discount. And in the process, you're blessing Israel's economy. You're fulfilling that biblical mandate to bless Israel as laid out in Genesis 12:3. And look, if you want to get the box by Christmas Day, order now. I think you have a few days here. You need to order ASAP to get the box at your doorstep at artzabox.com. My apologies, artzabox.com. I drew a brain freeze there. 18% off. And real quick, to give you an idea of the quality of the folks you're supporting, a lot of people are asking me, what can I do to help Israel right now? What can I do to support Israel in the wake of October 7th with Israel's economy struggling, etc.? Here's an idea. This is from the founder of Artza, my good friend. He's in Israel's reserves right now, fighting to defend the country. This is the quality of people that run this company. He said one of the companies that makes the goods that go into the Artza boxes, it's an institution set up to help young adults and teens with autism and Down syndrome and special needs. It's located in the Gaza border towns, this company. And on October 7th, many of their workers and volunteers were murdered. Not only that, they used their buildings as refuge, amazing, from the terrorists, and they saved dozens of people. They're heroes, and they are part of this Arts a Box initiative. And hey, that's the kind of folks I like to get behind and support and lift up in their time of greatest need. So check out Artsa. You will not regret it. Great, great Christmas gift for all your loved ones, and a Hanukkah gift as well. Hey, we want to talk real quick. H&H, we could call it, the Northern Front and the Southern Front before we go. Hamas and Hezbollah latest there. But real quick, that Jake Sullivan visit, U.S. National Security Advisor, met with Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel's war cabinet today. And I talked about the timetable earlier. Folks, he said that he wants to see, speaking on behalf of the Biden administration, they want to see basically the bulk, the intense fighting end by the end of this month. They want things to start winding down by the end of December. The new year, they want just Israel to be in mopping up mode. Now, they're saying that on one hand. And on the other hand, they're browbeating Israel incessantly about civilian casualties. So the Biden administration expects Israel, number one, to essentially avoid almost any civilian casualties, it seems, in a war in a densely populated area where Hamas intentionally uses civilians as human shields. Do that while finishing a very complex and difficult operation, literally in underground tunnels. Do all of that by the end of this year. And you wonder why I say that Israel, if the U.S. has its way, would essentially be fighting with one hand behind its back. Folks, listen, if the Biden administration had its way, there would be a ceasefire right now. And they're saying, look, we support Israel's got to do what it's got to do. Hamas must, they must be destroyed. But if Israel said, you know what, no, we want a ceasefire, the Biden administration would be all over it. They want to see this end. Because right now, they're feeling the international heat, and the so-called international community largely is blasting Israel, demanding a ceasefire. The Biden administration, to their credit, for all their flaws in the foreign policy realm and in this current war, they have not called for a permanent ceasefire, unlike the prime ministers of Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, who I quoted a few minutes ago. But you get the sense that the longer this goes on and Israel continues to do what it has to do and do it the right way, that the Biden administration is going to get increasingly antsy. Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, has professed that. Jake Sullivan today as well. Basically, the message is, look, you need to wrap this up. We don't know how long we can continue to support you. We're putting our necks out here on the line. Everyone else is against you, and we're basically the only ones really, really standing up for you. You're putting us in a bad spot. That's the message transmitted by administration officials to Israel. Again, pray for Israel's leaders to have spines of steel. U.S. officials keep saying, well, Israel will decide when the mission's accomplished and when this war is over. We're not going to dictate to them. But that's exactly what they're doing. And it brings to mind, again, that very, very important point that Israel relies a great deal of its armaments, its munitions, its military arsenal comes from the United States. Folks, Israel must find a way to domestically produce more of its own armaments, its own military hardware. More of it must be produced in Israel. I think it brought that home. Israel, in many ways, is too reliant on the United States, to the point where if the Biden administration really wants to dig in and turn up the heat, they could say, look, we're going to withhold these weapons deliveries. And Israel may be running low on what's needed to successfully wage and win a war. If the Biden administration withholds that military aid, that's a big problem. Israel needs to put it, and I don't know how Israel does this. I do know that Israel's innovation nation, startup nation, technological powerhouse. In normal times, peacetime, it's an economic powerhouse. I don't know how Israel does this. I don't want to see, as an American, I'd hate to see Israel run to China, say, hey, China, can you help us build up our military arsenal? That's the worst case scenario. So if they're going to rely on anyone, they should rely on God Almighty, number one. But secondly, in the natural, the U.S. is the best place. It's Israel's strongest ally. But you don't want to be too reliant on another nation And I believe in some ways Israel is when it comes to military support. There's many reasons for that. But at the end of the day, again, I don't know how Israel does this, but I think Israel has to become a bit more self-reliant in terms of its military arsenal, which is powerful, no doubt. But what I'm saying is this. Let me boil it down. If you get an outwardly hostile administration in the United States, and we're not there, they're not outwardly hostile, but behind the scenes, man, they are pressuring Israel. And it is not outside the realm of possibility, folks, yes, here in the United States, to have a president elected who would be hostile to Israel. Barack Obama was hostile to Israel. In many ways, he played the game. He knew he had to get reelected, and he knew he had people around him who wouldn't let him go all in with his hostility against Israel. He was not a friend of Israel. You saw that on Christmas Eve 2016, when he allowed an anti-Israel resolution to pass shamefully. But you might not always have a pro-Israel president, needless to say, in the United States, which makes the need for Israel to become more self-reliant in that regard, I think, with its military, even more important. I think we've seen that here during this war, where Israel wants to act completely freely and do what it needs to do. It can't be looking over its shoulder at the White House and calls from the White House. I don't know how Israel does that. I don't have the answer there, but I think it's probably a long-term project, to be honest, but it needs to be done. And we talk about long-term, there's more coming, folks, in the short term. That's the issue. Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Iranian regime. Let's close with Hezbollah and the Houthis. Real simple assessment right now, or analysis for you of what happened today between Hezbollah and Israel. More fire exchanged. Hezbollah continues to launch projectiles at Israel. Israel continues to respond with airstrikes. That great northern war is coming. The second front is open. It's just not open all the way. It's just not open full bore, but it is open. Then the third front. The Houthis in Yemen launched a missile today at a vessel in the Red Sea. Thankfully, it missed. But there's talk now, as this is also becoming a daily occurrence, the Houthis disrupting shipping in the Red Sea. Look, a good chunk of the world's oil supply passes through the Red Sea region every single day. And it's a non-starter for the Houthis to essentially control. Look, let me give you some exact numbers here. For the Houthis to essentially control the shipping lanes, here's some more specifics for you. 1 second. I'm going to pull this up from my phone here so I can get the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. It's only 18 miles wide at its narrowest point. 18 miles wide, Bab el-Mandeb Strait. But nearly 10%, I want to get that number right. That's why I pulled up my phone. I thought it was 10. And indeed it is. Nearly 10% of all oil traded at sea passes through it every day. An estimated 1 trillion in goods pass through that strait annually. And right now, the Houthis are causing major problems there. It's unsustainable. The world, look, the U.S. and Israel can't accept it. A disruption of the Red Sea. So now there's talk of an international force in the Red Sea. We shall see. Will the U.S. lead that force? Is Israel left out of that? Usually Israel in normal times, as if it's ever normal in the Middle East, but when Israel's not in a hot war with Hamas, they would have already reacted against the Houthis, not to mention Hezbollah in a massive way. But we live right now in very, shall we say, interesting times, perilous times. So we're keeping an eye on the north and the south. Quick reminder before I go, tune in tomorrow on the channel. Tomorrow afternoon, I believe it will be posted, that just harrowing interview with a survivor of October 7th who fought Hamas hand-to-hand, armed with a rock. Folks, it's a miraculous story. Only God was with this man and his family. I'll leave it at that, but you want to check that out here on the channel tomorrow. Until then, thanks so much for joining us here today. God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching.